Hello and welcome back to the world of Spirit and Shield. For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is John and I will be your guide on this journey. Spirit and Shield is a brand new fantasy world that we are exploring through short stories. Today we have actually our fifth short story. It is called Before the Petals Fall. So let's go ahead and jump right into it, and I hope you guys enjoy this one. Before the Petals Fall. She cursed silently to herself. The line was longer than she had expected. She left before the sun came up, but now she was wondering if she shouldn't have left the night before. Looking around, she cautiously gauged the competition. There were a lot of people. She pursed her lips and touched the small satchel tied up inside her dress. She knew its worth, but was still nervous. Moving her hand to another hidden pocket inside her dress, she found a small dagger. She took a deep breath. Too much relied on it, and she could not afford to fail. The line shuffled forward. She knew the trader only by reputation. He was said to be keen and wealthy, dealing in almost anything he could turn a profit on. The only thing he didn't deal in was weapons and armor, at least since the ban. He wasn't sympathetic to one side or the other. He simply wanted to continue to live his life the way he had for years, and hoped to continue to for still many years to come. The trader was known as Barsic, though the woman doubted that was his real name. The line moved forward again, then abruptly stopped, causing people to bump into each other. She clutched the lump in her dress, making sure it was secure. There was much grumbling, a few curses, and even a couple groans. She glanced up at the sky. The light of day was fading, drenching the city in a shower of gold and violet. Anxiety choked her nerves. How much longer would he remain open? She even began to consider trading her precious satchel with someone standing in line. She looked around. Dried fish, some vegetables, a broken cart, what looked to be part of a harness for a horse, though she wasn't quite sure. No, she'd be able to get more value out of it from the trader himself. Just then, a man with a goatee came out and signaled for the next person to go in. That must be Barsic, the woman thought. His appearance was a bit more bland than she was expecting. She thought he'd be covered in jewels, and taller. She continued to watch the people around her turn amber in the fading light. The man continued to come out, intermittently, and one by one ushered people into his house to make their trades. The woman stood now only 3 people from the trader's house. The sun was gone, its amber giving way to a cold, damp indigo shade. The woman pulled her shawl about her shoulders and shivered, though it was yet summer. A man began walking up and down the street, and, to her relief, began lighting the lanterns that hung from poles, lining the old stone street. She watched him carefully. The man was probably what they called a streetsman. She still marveled at the simplicity of the man's job, and its importance. Suddenly, the man with the goatee came out and held up his hands to the line of people. "Go home," he said sternly. "That's enough for today. Come back tomorrow." He abruptly went back inside, shutting the door behind him. The sound of a very audible bolt being locked into place followed. The line began to grumble even more now. The woman's heart fell. "Well, there's nothing left to do tonight," an older man behind the woman said to his son as he grabbed his bag. They left the line in the direction of what was likely an inn. In ones, twos, and small groups, the line disintegrated until only the woman was left standing there, trying to decide what she should do. If she spent the night there, she would miss the ferry in the morning. The next wouldn't depart for a few days. She could not wait that long. She looked up at the trader's house, which now seemed to tower over her, casting its long shadow in the lamplights. She moved her hand to her dress again, and this time traced the edges of a small dagger hidden deeper inside the folds of her dress. No, it had to be tonight. She looked again at the house. It was fairly typical of the area, though a bit larger and more ornate, with beautifully carved ledges jutting out between its 2 stories. It had a slanted tiled roof, not thatched. She walked around to the side. There was a small garden with a few herbs, probably for medicine and cooking, and a small pleasant-looking bench from which the man could watch his garden grow. She was surprised the man was a gardener, but then again, many people were now learning new skills for the sake of survival. Apparently, to Barsic, survival depended on tarragon, basil, and peppermint. Scanning the house, the woman spied a small window on the second floor. It was just big enough for her to fit through, if it were unlocked. She took a bucket that was lying nearby, set it on the bench, and climbed up. It was unsteady and rocked a little, but she held her balance. Reaching up, the woman managed to sink her fingers into the top of the ledge. Pressing her feet against the house, she attempted to pull herself up. Her foot slipped and swung down, kicking the bucket over and leaving a hollow thud hanging in the night air. The woman remained hanging by the ledge, waiting for some guards to appear and take her away, or for the owner of the house to come out and shout at her, or even strike her down. To her relief and disappointment, no one came, and she was left hanging by the ledge, her fingers straining to hold their grip. She put her feet firmly against the house again and inhaled deeply. As she exhaled, she pulled with all her might and managed to pull herself up to the ledge. The window was still too far away. The slanted roof came close enough to the ledge that she'd be able to climb up without too much difficulty, if she could get over to it. The ledge was much narrower than she thought, but she slowly slid her feet along it with her body pressed up against the house. Her heart beat rapidly against the wall, as the woman silently thanked her ancestors for having such small feet. She cursed her foolishness, wondering if there was not an easier way to get into the house. Maybe she should have knocked instead? Her hands were sweaty, her nerves were shaky, but she managed to get all the way over and climbed up onto the slanted roof without much difficulty. She sneaked up the roof. Now above the window, she lay down and pushed it gently with her hand. It opened freely. Without thinking further, she swung herself inside, shocked at her own agility and wondering if maybe she should have been a thief instead of a farm maid. Taking a few seconds to gather herself, she looked around. She was in some kind of bedroom, but no one was there. She left the room and made her way to the winding staircase. Peering over the polished wood railing, she noticed a light coming from a room downstairs. She descended the staircase like a child who was supposed to be in bed. A man was sitting at a small desk in the corner. His back was turned to her, and he seemed completely absorbed in his work. She coughed slightly, trying to get his attention without startling him. Her cough, though, came out as more of a whisper than a cough, and the man did not hear her. She summoned some more courage and coughed a little louder. This time the man turned suddenly. His eyes immediately fixed on the woman, and his goateed face became a scowl. "What are you doing here?" he said, standing up to meet the woman. "We are closed for the day and have been for some time. How did you—" The woman interrupted him, which was not something she was accustomed to doing. "I have a bag of Maracinth." She began the speech she had prepared and had practiced a dozen times, although she never expected she would have to break into the man's house to give it. "You must go now," the man said, his voice and temper rising. The woman hesitated. Nothing in her prepared speech quite fit into this moment. Just then, another man entered the room. The woman looked at him in shock. She had not expected anyone else to be here. The man was tall and lean, younger than the man with the goatee, and clean-shaven. Although he was noticeably disturbed by the yelling and confused by the woman's presence in the house, his gaze on the woman remained calm and relaxed. "Who is this?" he asked the man with the goatee. "Sir, I was just trying to get her to leave. I don't know how she got in, but I'll get to the bottom." The woman interrupted him again. "My name is Malina," she said firmly, "and I have come to trade rare medicinal herbs." "You have no right to be here," the goateed man interjected, but the younger man, whom Malina now reasoned was Barsic, held up his hand. "Go back to the ledger, Garum. I'll handle this," he said. The goateed man returned to his desk in the corner, while Barsic ushered Malina out of the office. Glancing over her shoulder, she saw Garum staring at her with the malice typical of a small man put in a position of authority, but now relegated to the sidelines. Barsik's house was a maze of material. On the tables, on the chairs, even on the floors lie pieces of fine art, jewelry, animal skins, and a variety of oddities that Malina could only guess at their purpose. She continued to look around in amazement, and began to feel no small amount of pity for the poor clerk Garum, whose job it was to make sense of all of it. Barsik led her into what appeared to be a sort of parlor room. "Have a seat." He motioned to a fairly large chair, covered with the hide of a sapoli. Malina sat down obediently. "Now, what can I do for you?" Barsik asked, leaning back against a large portrait of Feckin the Fair. Malina swallowed hard and began her speech again. "I have a bag of rare medicinal herbs that I wish to trade for something of fair value." She took out the small satchel and opened it, showing Barsik the contents. "What kind of herbs are those?" he asked. "Maricinth," she said. Barsik shook his head. "I've never heard of them before." The woman had anticipated the response. "They're very rare, difficult to grow, and only grown on my island in Olenekia. It's great for all sorts of ailments: stomach tremors, indigestion, head pain, disturbed sleep." "Ah!" Barsik smiled slowly. "So it's a miracle herb." "It's no miracle herb. Silanor Bradan, chief of chieftains in Olenekia, fell ill not more than 2 years ago. Perhaps news reached even here of his ailments. Healers were brought in from the mainland, but nothing they did helped. Then a healer from my island went to him. She ground some maricinth root and brewed a tea with it. In less than a week, our beloved Silanor Bradan was back to his old self and fighting fit." Malina looked him straight in the eyes, saying, "I've noticed you're a gardener too, so you're no fool when it comes to herbs. But maricinth is indeed very rare, so it's no surprise that you've never seen it before." She handed him the bag, allowing him to look more closely. He touched the bluish-gray roots, rolled them in his fingers, and smelled them. "I did hear about Silanor's illness, and rapid recovery. Still, I've never seen these before," he muttered. After a moment he closed the bag and looked at Malina. "So, what do you want for them?" "Anything of value," she said carefully. Barsik smiled. "Value is like beauty. The farmer adores the rain, while the fisherman has no use for it." Malina looked around the room and spied a pair of earrings lying on a table, half hidden by a parchment on ancient Upteri beast painting. Could they really be silkstones? She wondered if Barsik recognized what they were. "How about these?" she said, picking up the earrings. "No, that's absolutely not an item of, as you put it, fair value." He stood up, took them, and put them back on the table. "Look, it's late. It's time you were on your way. We can continue this tomorrow if you'd like." "It's more than a fair trade," Malina said firmly. She picked one up and examined it. The stone isn't even polished, but dull, and the metal is tarnished. Maricinth only grows under the proper conditions, and getting even a couple sprouts is difficult. A whole bag is more than worth its weight." Barsik looked at her carefully. "In fact," she continued, "I have a new crop growing as we speak. It should be ready for harvest before the new moon is born. There is more value in a steady source than a single item." Barsik opened the bag again, weighing it in his hand and looking again at the roots. "One earring," he said, "and if I like the quality of this maricinth, then we can talk further about our future dealings." Malina sighed and looked down, knowing the value of the herbs she had brought and how much work it took to grow them. "I guess I have no choice," she said softly. "It's a deal then. But I will return with more, because this is the finest maricinth in all of Olenekia. By the way, I apologize for the intrusion. I'm sure you know I meant no harm." Barsik laughed. "You have the grit of a trader, that's for sure. It might surprise you, but I have done similar things to make a trade." It did not surprise Malina, but she smiled politely. "Thank you again. Oh, I almost forgot the earring," Malina said, flustered and desperately just trying to leave the awkward situation. Barsic smiled and handed her the single earring, showed Malina to the door, and shut it behind her. Walking away from the house, Malina put the earring into a pocket deep inside her dress, and with a slight smile, headed in the direction of the harbor, where she hoped to find an inn. She could not help but feel a little guilty. Maricynth was indeed rare, but was more of a noxious weed than an herb, and had no medicinal properties at all. It had no value for anyone other than a curious botanist. She felt the earring in her pocket, and, finding its partner next to it, smiled again with no little amount of guilt. The ferry would leave early the next morning. Malina had no intention of returning to Tortonia to follow up on her promise to Barsic. She felt a shameful pride come over her as she reviewed her actions that night. She had broken into a man's house, tricked him, lied to him, and robbed him all in a matter of minutes. Her hands shook. She had never done anything like that in her entire life. The fear she felt in doing those things, and the shame she felt now that she had done them, were nothing compared to the duty that compelled her to take this path. Near the docks she found a decent inn that still had some beds left, not an easy feat in such times. The inn was tall, 3 or 4 stories high, stone-walled, and absolutely beautiful in its own way. The cost to stay the night was a bit higher than she was expecting, but she thought it better to pay it than to risk being robbed on the street. She clutched her precious treasure close at the very thought. Malina was restless the whole night for fear of missing the ferry the next morning. Every sound set her awake, and she would peer through the darkness for any sign of morning. The final time she awoke in the darkness, about 2 hours before sunrise, she remained awake. The sounds of men beginning their work at the docks told her morning wasn't too far off, so she got up and took a short walk about the docks. It was cold and damp. A great fog slept in the bay, making hard work for the lanterns. As she watched the men loading various ships, or loitering about smoking, she considered her next step. She had planned to get something of great value, and to try to trade for something better on Olenekia. She had not expected to find silkstones, though. That changed everything. The trade of silkstones had been banned when the blockade was put in place. It would be too risky to try to take them back to Olenekia. Besides, they would fetch a much higher price on the mainland. No, she must trade them here. But where, and with whom? Malina ceased her aimless pacing around the docks, and went to a small cafe as her stomach gently reminded her that she had not eaten dinner the night before. She was relieved to find a table near the back that no one else was sitting at or around. Sitting down in the merciful solitude, she took a small piece of bread and some cheese from her bag and began to nibble on them. A young woman, more girl than woman, brought Malina some hot water for tea. Sipping her tea, Malina's ears caught bits of conversation from the other tables. Many people were in good moods, having made decent trades the day before. Others were preparing for yet another day of standing in line. Few people were native to Tortonia. Malina had never expected life to be this hard, anywhere in Halenica. Not in her lifetime, at least. It was something she expected to hear in stories from her grandparents, not stories that she would someday tell her children. Though accompanied by the warmth of the tea, she felt alone, and was in such a mood that she preferred to remain so. Unfortunately, it was not her decision to make. A large, boisterous man with a big beard and bigger belly came over with his traveling companions. A young, skinny man wearing a large cloak, possibly to hide his twiggy figure, and an older man who was likely some kind of warrior in his youth, as he seemed the most physically fit of the three. Malina quietly laughed to herself, thinking this must be some kind of a joke. Though it was still morning, the large bearded man cradled an ale in his paw, and to the dismay of the serving girl, quickly ordered another one. "We've one more leg of our journey," he slurred. "I can't wait to see the columns, and grab a pint of glühwein. They're supposed to have the best there, you know," Twiggy chimed in, Relax, the elder said slowly. We're going there for business. Once we've completed our business, and if we have time, then you can explore. I know, Twiggy responded. But it's just so exciting. Kulikor's columns. Kulikor's columns. Malina's ears perked up. Salandia. It was close, but not too close where Barsik could reach her. There were plenty of traders there, and home of the uprising. Plenty of traders as well. She'd definitely be able to find someone to trade the silkstones with in Salandia. The big man slapped his belly with the hand not holding the ale. Oh, let the lad dream. While he's young enough to dream. There's no way he drank that much this morning. Malina caught a whiff of the man. Maybe still drunk from the night before. Malina tried to focus on her task, which was now to get to Salandia. Perhaps they could take me. She heard the men behind her beginning to gather their things. I must do something. Malina abruptly stood up and turned around quickly, running into the young twiggy man, the collision knocking her to the ground and spilling her tea everywhere. She lay there, waiting, trying to look as pathetic as possible. Twiggy jumped into action and quickly helped her back up, all the while apologizing profusely and dabbing Malina with a napkin. She began to whimper a bit as he helped her to her feet. I'm so sorry, she said, fighting back phantom tears. Twiggy held onto his damsel in distress gently by the arm. Are you okay? You're not hurt, are you? He asked with genuine concern for this plain but beautiful stranger. One. Just, everything's a mess, Malina said softly. She stooped and began to gather her things, which were now strewn about the floor. Now the bearded man with the belly, setting his ale down for the first time, jumped into action. Oh, lass, it's not all that bad. We'll help you clean it up, he said. It's not that, she started. I've just found out my father's taken ill. But, she sniffed. But I've no way of going to see him. And now, she gestured hopelessly to the mess around her. She glanced discreetly from under her dark locks at the men. The beard with the belly was hanging on every word. Ah, it'll be all right. Where did you say he was? The belly asked. 2. The elder was looking in another direction, completely indifferent to the conversation and the woman's condition. She knew she couldn't say Salandia. It would be too much of a coincidence, and few people these days were traveling there. The elder was already suspicious. He's up north, at the Cambrian Pass. She scattered the words like seeds and hoped the idea would sprout in their minds. The Cambrian Pass? The elder scoffed. What exactly would he be doing there? He is, she sniffed, a wagon master. He took ill on the journey, and his second had to finish the trip with him in the back. Malina wiped a glistening tear from her eye. This one was real. I don't know what I'll do without him. He'll be... The young man trying to head off the elder said quickly, Perhaps we could take you there. We've a wagon ourselves and we're departing this morning. The elder's wrinkles grew wrinkles. We can't afford any delays, and taking her that far north would cost us 3 extra days at least. Ah, come on, Harson. Look at the poor lass. The belly and Twiggy ganged up on the elder. He frowned even more, which Malina did not before think possible. We can take you as far as Salandia. From there you find your own way, he said sternly, and that was the end of it. 3. Malina smiled gratefully and bowed her head. The trip to Salandia went by fairly quickly as the elder man drove the horses with great skill, while the other two, Sulahan, the younger skinny man, and Vikanor, the not-so-young or skinny man, talked Malina's ears off, one from each side. They told fantastic tales about their travels, each one trying to outdo the other and impress their fair guest. The atmosphere of joviality, however, faded as they neared Salandia. Malina smelled the city before she saw it. Harson the elder noticed the look of disgust and confusion on her face. Smoke, he said gently. Malina looked at him. Her look of concern intensified. The uprising was put down 4 moons ago. she said. Her mouth hung open. Harson sighed deeply. There was a lot of fire. The uprising ended 4 moons ago. The fires continued for another moon after, he said, pulling a pipe from his coat and lighting it. Malina felt the color drain from her body. Maybe it was a mistake coming here. Some of the city's still good, said Vicanor. The old town is right gone, but the courthouse and some of the merchants' shops north of the river survived. He half smiled, realizing how little comfort his words gave her. Closer to the city, the smell grew stronger, and then blended with the sickly odor of sewage and decay. For the first time in a year, Malina looked on Solandia, now a broken city, its shattered spine jutting up through the ruins of once great stone buildings. The most lively city in Halenica did not pulse as it had in times past. In fact, its heart hardly beat at all. The people who once joined in song and dance in the narrow streets, who raised banners proudly in defiance, now raised neither hand nor voice in hatred or joy. They passed like shadows through the streets. With carts, with shovels, with bundles on their backs, they picked through the ruined carcass for anything still worth salvaging. Sulahan stood up suddenly in the wagon. Where are they? Where? The realization took the breath from his lungs. 7 great stone columns lie like fallen trees across the entrance to the old town. Kulakors. Sulahan whispered. Reminders of the old times. It's no surprise they destroyed them, Harson said. The wagon continued past these pitted, scorched golems, and through the old town of Solandia, every now and then stopping for Vicanor and Sulahan to clear a bit of rubble so the wagon could advance further. They proceeded to a large bridge where a dozen guards stood in full armor. A small detachment of horse guards paced anxiously back and forth, the sun glinting off their crested helmets. A man, Malina presumed to be the captain of the guard, walked up to the wagon as it approached. "What's your business?" he said, not with any hostility, but decidedly not politely. "Business," Harson replied. "We're heading to the merchants' quarter to make some trades." "You're all merchants?" the captain said, raising his eyebrows. "What about her?" He pointed to Malina. "My daughter." Harson didn't miss a beat. The captain nodded. Malina looked at Harson and, for the first time, noticed that they did in fact share many similar traits, enough to be easily mistaken as kin. The captain motioned for 2 guards to search the wagon, while 2 others took Harson, Malina, Sulahan, and Vicanor off to the side. It was Malina's first time being guarded, and she felt each moment as if the guard's spear would slip forward from his grasp and impale her instantly. She shuddered at the thought, and the growing chill, and pulled her shawl around her shoulders, and in front of her as a kind of shield. The days were growing shorter, and she was running out of time. The guards at the wagon motioned to the others, and they all went back to their post, allowing Harson and his crew to continue to the merchants' quarter in Solandia. The buildings here were mostly untouched, and still as Malina remembered them. There was a welcome warmth in how familiar it was, though this part of the city was much changed as well. Armored guards patrolled on foot and horse, with spears and swords ready. Archers stood on rooftops and watched the square and the markets. A middle-aged woman with her hair in a braided bun was stopped by 2 of the guards. They talked briefly, then they took her away. Malina did not know where or why. None of the passers-by intervened or even took note. People simply went about their daily business, much as they had before, perhaps preferring not to notice the change, or simply accepting the changes as a new norm for Solandia. "Well, this is it," Harson said as the horses slowed at the edge of the market. He turned to Sulahan and Vicanor. "Let's get unloaded. No one's going to trade for what they cannot see." The 2 set about their work, but kept looking up at Malina. "Thank you, sir," she said to Harson. "You've been kinder than you realize." Harson smiled for the first time and slightly bowed his head. "I was wondering," she looked at her hands, "if you knew any traders in the area. See, I'm looking to trade some things." "You know we're traders, right? What are you looking to trade?" Harson eyed her curiously. Well, she felt the handle of the dagger in her dress. They're items that she had to take the risk, that could land me in prison. She said the words so quietly she was unsure if Harson even heard her, but his eyes told her he did. For a moment he said nothing, but continued to stare at Malina. Look, lass, I'm not looking for any trouble, and neither should you. This is not the place and these are not the times. He turned away, but Malina grabbed him by the arm. She pulled the dagger from her dress and held it up to Harson. His eyes traced the blade and grew weary. I see, he sighed. He needs me. Malina's voice shook as tears flooded her eyes. Lass, he's likely already dead. We all are. I made a vow, she said. Her body was trembling at this point, but she held the dagger fast. Harson looked down and kicked at the dirt. He shook his head and muttered under his breath. I can't help you. He looked up. But there's a man who can. I wouldn't even bother telling you his name. He changes it all the time anyway. You'll find him in the second house from the courthouse. It has blue shutters. Go around to the side and tell him you're a friend of Whiteneck. Malina nodded and slowly put the dagger back into her dress. Thank you, sir, she said, beginning to turn away. Then she turned back and added, good luck and good fortune. The courthouse, as Malina remembered, was not so far, so she set off at a brisk pace down a large cobblestone road and let the sounds and smells of the city guide her. Before long she recognized the large majestic building made of polished stone. It had likely been there for 1,000 years, and Malina presumed it would last for another 1,000. Seeing 2 guards standing by the courthouse, Malina tried to cross quickly to the other side of the road without alerting them. One of the guards, however, saw her and motioned to the other. Malina's heart jumped. If they found the silkstones, she would not only go to prison, but her whole journey would have been in vain. And she would be too late. Before the petals fall. The words came back to her. A cold wind blew through the street. She didn't have much time. She kept walking, trying to keep her head down. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see the guards talking. She didn't know why, but she was sure they were talking about her. Malina was watching the guards so intently that she did not notice the man in front of her. Yulina! He exclaimed, wrapping his arms around her. Malina tried to jump back, but found herself unable to. The man was in his mid-30s, but had dark wrinkles around his eyes. From the safety of these wrinkles, his eyes shone a bright blue, and he wore a smile to match. I was just looking for you, the man said. He grabbed her arm cordially, but put no small amount of pressure on her nerve, forcing her to accompany him. Malina winced in pain and tried to pull slowly away, not wanting to make a scene. Just a little further, the man whispered. They're watching. The guards? Malina whispered back. Not just the guards. He dug his fingers deeper into her arm, compelling her to pick up her pace. Smile, he commanded. He slid his arm around her waist and pulled Malina closer than she was comfortable with. They turned down a damp alley. The musty smell of mold on the stones and the closeness of the walls made her feel faint and trapped. No, she said, not this way. The man ignored her quiet pleas and continued leading her through the dim, narrow streets of a part of the city she was not familiar with. They went into shops, only to leave a few moments later, sometimes back through the entrance, and other times through a side or back door. Finally, they entered an inn. Upon entering, they were greeted by the smell of both fresh and stale urine. The man did not flinch. He went straight to the innkeeper and asked for a room for 2. He then looked carefully at the innkeeper and added, "The attic room, please." The innkeeper nodded and took them up to a room on the 4th floor, locking the door behind them. Malina noticed for the first time that the man had not given the innkeeper any compensation for the room. He walked to the window immediately, approaching it cautiously from the side. Malina stood in silence while the man completed his observation. He turned around. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Malina hesitated, then carefully said, "My name is Norala. I'm just here with my family. My father is a wagon master who The man shook his head and walked up to her. Stop. Stop it now. We don't have time for lies. You and I don't have time for lies. Why were they watching you? I don't know. Maybe the guard liked me? What's it to you? Malina said, feigning indignation. The man laughed. The guard maybe, but not the Braki who were following you. Braki? Malina said in shock. I think we lost them, but you need to tell me the truth. I can't help you if I don't know why they're pursuing you. The man looked hard at Malina, his eyebrows pleading. I've come to find a merchant, a man who lives by the courthouse, she started. The house with the blue shutters, the man said steadily. Well, yes, Malina said. Who sent you? His gaze hung over Malina like a thundercloud. I've come myself. Then, remembering what Harson had told her, she added, I'm a friend of Whiteneck. The man's demeanor changed in an instant. Well then, Norala, what have you come to trade? He smiled. Malina took out the 2 earrings and showed them to him, keeping them close to her body. Those are illegal, he said. Malina began to crimson and thought maybe she'd made a mistake. Noticing her obvious discomfort, he added, You're not in trouble. Not with me. I deal largely in illegal items. I am the merchant, though I haven't been to that house with blue shutters for some time now. He frowned a little. So what do you want for the silkstones? This was her chance. Steel, she said in a steady voice. I need a good sword and full armor. The merchant looked at her curiously. Those are also illegal. Again, you're not in trouble. I'm just surprised. You don't seem the type. He walked over to a small table with a carafe of wine and some glasses that stood in the corner of the room. Motioning for Malina to join him, he picked up the carafe and with practiced hands poured himself and Malina each a glass. I can get you a sword, a good one, but 2 silkstones of that size are not worth a full set of armor, not even in these times. He handed the glass to Malina, but she refused it. The man did not mind her refusal and proceeded to sip from his own glass, setting the other on the table. The silkstones are of good quality and we'll put them to good use, but there's something else that we need at the moment, and a great deal more urgently. He looked down and rolled the glass in his hands. We need someone to deliver a letter to one of the guards at the prison on Cistern Street. Why not send a messenger, Jay? Malina asked. We need something more reliable. We must be certain the letter will get where it needs to. He sipped the wine. If you can get the letter to the guard named Stalinor, then you will have your sword and your suit of armor. Stalinor's usually on the morning shift, early morning. He's tall, broad shoulders, usually wears a polecat. Find him, ask him what day it is. If he says a day of fasting, then hand him the letter, saying nothing more, embrace him, and leave. And if he says something else? Malina asked. Leave without delay. I will find you, the man said. How will you? She started. I will find you, he repeated sternly. Malina took a sip of wine and nodded. It was near nightfall, so the man prepared a bed for her in the attic room in the inn. She lay down on the straw mattress, placed the dagger next to her head, and caressed it as she drifted off to sleep. It's time. The man was fully dressed and kneeling by her side. Malina shook the sleep off, hardly aware of where she was. But slowly the events of the previous day became clearer, and she remembered what she must do. She prepared herself, mentally and otherwise, tucking the dagger away. What size would you like the armor? The man asked, eyeing the dagger as it disappeared into the folds of Malina's dress. He's about your size, a little taller, Malina responded. How will you get it to him? I got past the blockade once. I'll do it again, Malina said, feigning confidence. In truth, she had never expected to get this far. We will get it to Olenekia, he said gently. Get the letter to Stalinor, and regardless of what happens, we will fulfill our end of the bargain. Malina stared in amazement. Why? Thank you, but why would you do that? she asked. The man pulled a dagger from inside his shirt. He smiled. We were bound just before the uprising. She gave me this dagger, and I swore to protect her with it. He looked at the dagger, turning it in his hands. I failed. He shook himself from the shadow of memories and put the dagger away. We're on the same side, he said. Malina smiled gently at her host, whose name she still did not know. It's time you were gone. Staliner will only be on shift for another hour or so. Try to do it when the other guards aren't watching. It'll be easier and safer for both of you. Go. Malina left the inn. She wrapped her shawl about her shoulders, but still shook from the early morning chill. Before the petals fall. She quickened her pace, but then slowed it, thinking it might draw too much attention if she seemed in a hurry. Her feet carried her faster than she had intended, and she found herself turning down Cistern Street in no time at all. She approached the prison. One tall guard stood outside. He was indeed broad in the shoulders, but was this Staliner? She walked closer, and, seeing a live polecat sitting on his shoulder, she smiled slightly. She had expected the polecat to be a shawl or an emblem, not an actual living creature. This must be him. Sir, what day is today? She asked as casually as she could, though her heart was trying to escape her chest. He looked around as if bored. He sighed, saying, A day of fasting. She handed him the letter quickly, which he took and slid deftly inside his armor. She embraced the stranger, and remembering what she had learned from the man who had given her the mission, she smiled as she turned away and left. 2 weeks later, Malina awoke from a dream to find a nightmare beginning. The chirping Kelikona in the salt wind and the sound of glistening waves on the shores of Olenekia should have heralded a beautiful day. His arm was draped over her waist like a sash. He was still fast asleep. She smiled sadly, for she had not the heart to wake him to the darkness of the day. She tried to go back to sleep, but the day was here, and the sun's rays, which would not be ignored, beckoned for life to stir. She slid from the bed, without making a noise, poured some berry juice, and went outside. The ocean rolled gently, so gently. It's not possible. The petals of the maria trees were falling, blanketing the ground in blue and white. The bellows of the Alahias rang out and echoed in the hollow world. It can't be today. Give us just one more. It's too perfect. Don't take this one from us, too. A tear slid down her cheek. She jumped, surprised to find him awake and his arms slipping around her. She felt his heart beating softly on her back. Good morning, love, he said softly, kissing her on the hair. Morning, Malina responded. I didn't see you get up. They held each other and watched the ocean as if it had just been born. Then a horn sounded in the distance. The Alahias, the Kelikona, all of Olenekia went silent, letting the echoes reach all who were awaiting the dreaded call. He smiled grimly, and they went back into the house. Malina picked up his shirt, and he slid it on in silence. She gave him his pants, his socks, his boots, his gambeson. He pulled his cuirass on over his head, and she fastened the buckles, pulling the leather straps tight. She fastened his greaves and his gauntlets. She made sure every piece was in place. Then Malina picked up the helmet, a solid piece of metal, opteri forged with a crest. It was the helmet of a horse guard. A finer helmet would be hard to find. Malina kissed it and handed it to him. Nick. She pursed her lips as she handed him the sword. No more words came. He held her close. She could no longer feel his heartbeat. She felt only the cold metal between them, no matter how tightly they held each other. Only the urgency and desperation of war could pull him away. And it did. Nicanor left Olenekia that day. With his men, he fought through the blockade and invaded the mainland with a host of other islanders, not just from Olenekia. He wrote letters to Malina as often as he could, but sometimes she would hear nothing for weeks at a time. It was about 3 months after he left that a wagon master slowly approached the cottage, coming up from the road that led to the old stone pier, the Beast Pier, as they called it. Malina was outside washing some clothes in a bucket. The wagon master stopped and climbed down, leaving weary horse and weary wagon on the dirt road. Malina looked up. Her eyes didn't meet the man's, but went directly to what he was holding. A helmet. The crested helmet of a horse guard. Finer quality would be hard to find. But still, it was dented horribly. She shook her head and took a step back. No. The word barely escaped. No, she shouted in desperation. The man frowned and looked down. The rest is in the wagon, he said. He wanted it returned if... His voice broke off, drowned by Malina's hopeless sobs and the roar of the sea. He brought the armor and Nicanor's sword into the cottage and departed, leaving Malina with the empty armor and a hollow heart. Istoran fen. So that is the end of Before the Petals Fall. I hope you enjoyed it as much as you could. Let me know what you thought of the story. If you had any questions about the story or any of the world building, let me know down below in the questions or comments, or you can always contact me via social media. The links to my accounts are down below in the comments as well, or in the description. So let me know what you thought. If you liked it, feel free to give it a like. If you're not already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe so you can see future stories. And also, please tell your friends. Okay, one, it's more fun to talk about stories with your friends, and two, it would be great to have more people on this journey. So let them know, especially if you enjoyed the story. I mean, you're kind of being selfish if you don't tell your friends. So I guess that's all for this week. Our next video will actually be in 2 weeks. I'll give you guys a little bit more time to watch this video to kind of take in the story. I'm also working on a new project, which I'll let you know about that in the future. Really excited about it, but it will take some time. But so next video in 2 weeks will be commentary and answering any questions and comments that you have on this story. So again, subscribe. I'll be there next week. And I guess that's all for today. So again, thank you for all of your support and for joining me on this journey. Okay, so until next time, take care.